Imagine a world where the sun shines for 14 straight days. No sunset, no nightfall, 2 weeks of continuous daylight. And then, all at once, it goes away. And for the next 14 days, you are plunged into darkness, with temperatures dropping to negative 280 degrees, a cold that freezes all electronics, cracks metal, certainly is no place for humans to live. Well, that world might sound like something out of a novel, but in fact, that is actually our closest neighbor, the moon. Because it rotates slower than the Earth, most locations on the moon are in sunlight for 2 weeks, and then darkness for 2 weeks, the darkness, a period that is called the lunar night. And last year, a US commercial company landed on the moon. An incredible feat. But because the spacecraft relied on solar power and batteries, they operated for 2 weeks during the lunar day and froze to death just hours into the frigid cold of the lunar night. In contrast to that, there is one country that is operating on the moon today and has been operating for the past 7 years. And that is China, with their Chang'e 4 lander that uses nuclear power to survive the 2-week-long lunar night. Now, this is not nuclear fission or fusion. This is a technology called radioisotope power systems. And these are small devices with radioisotope heat sources that could fit inside of your palm that take material that decays over decade-long half-lives and produces heat as it does so. And you can take that heat and you can use it to keep a spacecraft warm and in larger systems generate electricity to enable these continuous operations during the lunar night. So while the US landed on the moon last year at the cost of $100 million to NASA and the taxpayer and operated for only a handful of days, China has been using radioisotopes to have continuous operations since 2019. And they have ambitions to land humans on the moon soon as well. And the race is officially on, because this week, NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman announced America's plan to build a base on the moon. This is not going back to visit as we did in Apollo. This is a plan to build a permanent moon base, a $20 billion program to launch dozens of spacecrafts to the lunar surface in the coming years. In 2027, starting with a near monthly cadence of uncrewed spacecrafts going to the lunar surface. In 2028, landing humans on the moon. And by the 2030s, having a permanent human presence on the surface of the moon. Which means that every single night as you walk outside and look up at the moon, you'll be looking up at Americans that are conducting science, that are building infrastructure, that are securing this strategic foothold on the surface of the moon. Now, this won't happen overnight. The moon base will be built over time. And it is going to be built mission by mission in the coming years, but only if these missions can survive the lunar night, unlike the spacecraft we did last year, and over time accumulate into this permanent presence, which means that we must solve this problem of the lunar night. The good news is we've actually done that before. In fact, the United States invented radioisotope power in the 1950s, and in the Apollo program, astronauts brought radioisotope power systems to the surface of the moon and left them behind to power scientific payloads that for years operated and gathered the most valuable lunar data that we have. And this is what I believe is probably the coolest photograph of all time, which is astronaut Alan Bean on Apollo 12 handling plutonium on the moon. In addition to Apollo, we've also used radioisotope power to explore our solar system, such as the Voyager spacecrafts that, as they got further away from the sun, needed radioisotopes to generate electricity to power them. And nearly 50 years later, are still operating in interstellar space, sending us pings back to Earth daily. So the question here remains, if radioisotopes were used to power Apollo, if they explored our solar system, if China is using them today on the surface of the moon, why did we land a spacecraft on the moon last year with solar power that only lasted a couple days? And the answer is quite simple. Radioisotope power wasn't available because for decades, this technology has been built one at a time by the US government, utilizing a really rare material called plutonium-238 that has to be rationed between a series of flagship missions. And that model worked just fine when demand for this technology was one spacecraft per decade that was going to go explore Pluto. It does not work when we are building a moon base, because in the coming years, in practice, the moon base is going to be dozens of spacecraft on the lunar surface that must operate at the same time for years at a time. These are rovers and landers, navigation beacons, communication relays, habitats, individual missions that over time come together into infrastructure, but only if they can survive the night. Which means that we must massively increase the production of radioisotope power to ensure that these spacecrafts that are going to the lunar surface in the coming years can survive the night and come together to build some permanence. The good news is that we're on our way to do that. And for years, industry and government have been working to develop radioisotope power systems that use more available and abundant fuels, really using what is nuclear waste material that is sitting around the country every day, decaying away as a liability to the taxpayer and the Department of Energy, and taking this waste material and recycling it into fuel for these power systems. And this is not theoretical. This is technology that has been built, tested. We've proven that it works. We have cut through the regulatory red tape. We have invested in infrastructure. And now it is time to act, and it is time to move quickly. Because if we are serious about building a moon base and being the first country to do so, then we must industrialize the production of radioisotope power to ensure that all of the spacecrafts that are going to the moon in the coming years can survive the night and over time build up our base. We are in the midst of a second space race. But this time the race is not to go to the moon. It is to stay there. It is to stay there so that we can explore this 4.5 billion year old time capsule that contains clues to the origins of Earth, the sun, our solar system. Stay there so we can harvest materials that we can bring back to Earth to unlock new industries from quantum computing to fusion. And stay there so that we can take ice that is on the south pole of the moon and convert that into breathable air and rocket fuel that will enable the moon to be a place where humans can live, and in the future, a launching pad to Mars and the rest of our solar system. But in order to do this, we need these missions that are going to the lunar surface in the coming years to survive for more than 2 weeks. We have to survive the night. So radioisotopes must be a foundation of the moon base that NASA announced this week that we are embarking on. Because being able to survive the night is different from us once again visiting the moon and being able to stay there. Thank you.